Bien, amigas, amigos, bienvenidos a esta nueva edición del programa de conferencias magistrales de la Fundación Rafael del Pino. Hoy nos convoca una jornada singular en la que contamos con unos acompañantes y unos invitados de excelencia. Apreciado rector, Alfonso Sánchez Tabernero, querida decana, Charo Sádava, es un placer teneros hoy con nosotros, con todo el equipo de la Universidad de Navarra, para desarrollar juntos esta conferencia central de la 6ª edición de vuestra iniciativa Conversaciones. Cuando hace ya 4 años nos planteasteis desarrollar juntos esta conferencia anual, fue muy fácil llegar a un acuerdo, ya que nos une un objetivo común, que no es otro que favorecer la reflexión y el diálogo como un medio para la difusión del conocimiento. Una fructífera colaboración que ha contado en las ediciones anteriores con la participación de personalidades del mundo del periodismo como Jill Abramson, Paul Steiger o Martin Baron. Y con la vista puesta en el debate tan actual sobre la libertad de expresión y la misión del periodismo en la sociedad democrática, ¿quién mejor que James Harding para unirse a este elenco de personalidades del periodismo mundial e iluminarnos sobre estas cuestiones? Señor Harding, quiero expresarle nuestra gratitud por haber aceptado la invitación a visitar España y por protagonizar hoy este diálogo sobre un aspecto tan determinante para todos nosotros como es la libertad de expresión. Es un verdadero privilegio tenerle entre nosotros. Y quiero también mostrar nuestra gratitud al director de la Fundación de Vocento, Borja Vergareche, por recoger la batuta de la moderación del diálogo. Muchas gracias. Y cómo no, por supuesto, quería hacer extensiva esta bienvenida a todas las personas que nos acompañan en el Auditorio Rafael del Pino, que nos siguen en directo por streaming a través de la sala de televisión de la Fundación, la FRPTV, y las redes sociales. Aunque voy a ser breve, permítanme plantearos una cuestión. ¿Por qué un debate como este en la Fundación Rafael del Pino? Cuando Rafael del Pino tomó la decisión de crear esta fundación, tuvo como motivaciones fundamentales contribuir a formar dirigentes españoles en todos los ámbitos, defender la libertad y difundir el conocimiento. Algo que intentamos hacer cada día, entre otras muchas iniciativas, con diálogos como este, con los que deseamos contribuir a establecer los referentes para el debate, de forma que en el ejercicio de la libertad individual, cada uno de nosotros podamos conformar nuestra propia posición. Rafael del Pino siempre creyó en la libertad entendida en su sentido fuerte, como una unidad indivisible. La libertad del hombre es una sola y engloba todas las libertades, ya sean políticas, civiles o económicas. Y la prensa, parafraseando a Hans Christian Andersen, es la artillería de la libertad. Vivimos en un tiempo difícil para el periodismo. La información en la política y la sociedad actuales a menudo aparece distorsionada, fruto del sectarismo que nos asola, y la palabra se convierte muchas veces en un instrumento para restringir el campo de pensamiento del ciudadano. Por otra parte, el cambio tecnológico y la conectividad global han sido un verdadero shock en el sector de la comunicación. Hoy muchos profesionales que cubren conflictos armados se han convertido en verdaderos objetivos militares. Las normas de seguridad nacional introducen nuevas restricciones al ejercicio de la profesión de periodista. No continúo enumerando cuestiones, ¿no? Son muchas y vamos a tener un interesantísimo debate con personas mucho más preparadas para responderles a todos ustedes que yo. Como debe ser esta una breve introducción, y no me corresponde por tanto a mí defender en estas palabras de bienvenida el papel fundamental de la libertad de prensa y de información en nuestra sociedad, casi lo dejo aquí, pero no estaríamos en la Fundación Rafael del Pino si no rompiéramos una lanza por el libre ejercicio de la profesión de periodista y de la iniciativa empresarial en este sector clave. Bien, para analizar, como he dicho, estas y otras muchas cuestiones, tenemos el privilegio de contar con acreditados expertos. Por ello, concluyo dándoles a todos una calurosa bienvenida a la Fundación Rafael del Pino y reiterando la gratitud de la Fundación a invitados, colaboradores y asistentes a este encuentro en esta que hoy queremos que sea su casa. Cedo la palabra a continuación a la decana Charo Sádava, que continuará con la introducción al acto. Muchas gracias a todos.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos a esta 6ª edición de Conversaciones. Quería también comenzar agradeciendo, por supuesto, a la Fundación Rafael del Pino su colaboración, que nos permite disfrutar de este excepcional espacio y del cobijo de una marca comprometida con el desarrollo del conocimiento. Quería dar también una bienvenida particular a todos los alumni de la Facultad de Comunicación de la Universidad de Navarra, que hoy nos acompañan aquí o a través de las redes, y a los profesores y alumnos y alumnas que están siguiendo esta sesión por streaming desde Pamplona. Y, por supuesto, a todos los profesionales que se han unido a esta necesaria conversación de los retos del periodismo, que dura ya 6 años. Necesaria porque los retos del periodismo son también los retos de la sociedad a la que servimos, haciendo posible el ejercicio del derecho a la información de los ciudadanos. No se nos escapa que la profesión está sometida a numerosas tensiones. Por un lado, una audiencia crédula y adormecida, acostumbrada a la abundancia de información, a la referencia social para la cualificación de sus fuentes y al consumo rápido y poco reflexivo de contenidos. Por otro, la emergencia del fenómeno de las noticias falsas que persiguen intereses políticos y económicos de maneras poco legítimas. Junto a esto, vemos cómo marcas periodísticas contrastadas sufren el embate directo de líderes políticos mientras lidian con los efectos de la crisis económica en sus estructuras. Pero al mismo tiempo, comienzan a aparecer evidencias que vinculan la calidad de la información disponible con la calidad democrática. Las sociedades libres son sociedades bien informadas, lo que no deja de ser una llamada directa a nuestra responsabilidad en la doble condición y de periodistas. Esto lo tuvo claro San José María Escrivá cuando alentó la aparición del Instituto de Periodismo, germen de la Facultad de Comunicación de la Universidad de Navarra, convencido de que el ejercicio responsable de esta profesión requería de una formación universitaria inexistente en la Europa de entonces. Con el fin de aportar luz a esta situación, la Facultad promovió hace 6 años la aparición de esta iniciativa, que ya ha contado, como se ha dicho antes, con las voces y la experiencia de David Levy, Jill Abramson, Paul Steiger y Marty Baron. Hoy es un placer para nosotros añadir a James Harding a esta lista. Thank you, James, for being here. Bien, agradezco, por supuesto, también a Borja Vergareche, director de Innovación de Vocento, su disposición para presentar a James Harding y moderar el debate posterior. Y de manera especial al equipo en Madrid, que trabaja por hacer posible Conversaciones, liderado por Ana Sánchez de la Nieta. Bien, como sucede con las buenas conversaciones, esta sobre el periodismo ha compartido, además de este momento estelar que hoy disfrutamos, muchos otros a lo largo de los pasados meses que han girado en esta ocasión en torno a la información en televisión. El vídeo que veremos a continuación y que precederá a la conferencia de James Harding sirve como un buen resumen de lo que ha dado de sí la conversación de este año que culmina con este gran evento. Muchas gracias a todos y buenas tardes.
Tenemos que seguir haciéndolo, sobre todo por la capacidad que tiene para asumir muchas veces sus errores.
Difícilmente replicable en todos los países porque requiere de unos medios económicos que no todo el mundo está en condiciones de aportar.
Por varios motivos. Uno, por su potencial, por su potencia. La potencia de entrada económica, la red que tiene de corresponsalías, de delegaciones en todo el mundo, la lengua en que emite, la mayor lengua de comunicación de nuestros días. Y tercero, da mucha envidia como periodista porque hay una cosa que está incrustada en la cultura de la BBC, que es su independencia.
En una redacción pública uno no puede dar un puñetazo encima de la mesa y decir que las cosas se van a hacer de una determinada manera. Eso lo consigues a base de convencer en función de una buena praxis periodística.
Nuestros accionistas y ante quienes respondemos son los ciudadanos, y eso no lo pueden decir las televisiones privadas de la misma manera.
¿Tiene la tele mayor responsabilidad que los demás en todo este tema de los fake news? Yo diría que sí.
pero porque la tele al final llega a más gente y tiene más presupuesto. Y por tanto, yo creo que esa responsabilidad va aparejada.
Disparamos con cañones, o sea, disparamos con millones y medios de espectadores, ¿no? Y lo que hacemos tiene influencia. Y a nosotros eso nos genera un punto de vértigo y de sensación de responsabilidad, la verdad que sí.
En el ejercicio de tu libertad decides la brújula donde la sitúas, porque no todo vale.
Es cierto que muchas veces la velocidad, más ahora en el entorno digital, se ha convertido en un grado, en un atributo. Y sacrificamos muchas veces veracidad, confirmación, por dar la noticia a los primeros, ¿no?
Muchas veces se toman atajos y esos atajos pueden hacer que la historia brille más, pero al fin y al cabo van a hacer que caiga la credibilidad del producto, ¿no?
Y una metedura de pata en este ámbito es un daño a la credibilidad y a la solvencia de tu marca terrible.
Tienes muy poco tiempo para hacer controles de calidad, ¿no? O sea, al final estás en directo y estás produciendo 7 horas y media de información al día, ¿no? Entonces, los controles de calidad vienen más por el trabajo previo que hagas, por el trabajo editorial, por la responsabilidad que metas en cada redactor o en cada editor, que por lo que luego puedas hacer en el in situ cuando suceden las cosas, ¿no?
Es clave la formación de tu equipo. Y en ese sentido, cuando recibimos una información, lo que tienes que tener es un equipo bien engrasado para que pueda contrastarla rápido y ante la duda mantenemos el principio de prudencia, ¿no?
Pues verdad, que es información falsa o información o directamente mentira o medias verdades. Eso ha existido siempre. Siempre ha habido poderes, no solo los gobiernos, distintos poderes interesados en manejar, en manipular, en influir en la opinión pública. Eso ha ocurrido siempre. Lo que ocurre es que volvemos a lo mismo. Gracias a las nuevas tecnologías, eso ahora es más sofisticado y mucho más potente.
Con un teléfono móvil en el bolsillo de cada ciudadano del mundo prácticamente, es muy difícil que ocurra algo en cualquier esquina del mundo de lo que no haya una imagen. Esa es la parte positiva. La parte negativa es que hay que tener mucho cuidado con imágenes que son vendidas como reflejo de algo que ha ocurrido y quizá ha ocurrido pero no ese día, sino que son imágenes de otro momento que se empiezan a circular por las redes sociales muy rápidamente y a las que es muy difícil sustraerse por el interés que puedan generar, ¿no?
Si es periodista, si se mantienen básicamente dos criterios, ¿no? Uno, el de la confirmación de la información, complemento básico y definitorio del ser periodístico, y dos, el de la honradez.
Lo que da la libertad y lo que da el éxito a un medio es su prestigio y su credibilidad.
Ahora la gente ya no es un ente pasivo, ahora la gente participa y puede buscar esa información y puede comprobar que lo que dices, si lo que dices es verdad o no y si tiene sustento o no, lo cual a mí me parece maravilloso porque lo que hace es mejorar nuestro trabajo y obligarnos a ser mejores.
Buenas tardes a todos. Pues es un placer y la velada promete. Si el estándar es el evento categoría blockbuster, que fue la visita de Marty Baron en este mismo foro hace casi un año, promete. Promete yo creo que por tres cosas, por el foro, por nuestro invitado y por el tema. Así que gracias Vicente y a la Fundación Rafael del Pino y Charo y a la Universidad de Navarra por acogernos. Conversaciones se ha convertido en un evento, yo diría que importante. Es muy importante que se hable de periodismo, es muy importante que se discuta de periodismo, es importante que la sociedad quiera hablar de periodismo y es aún más importante que los periodistas nos prestemos a esa conversación y demos la cara y respondamos con humildad por la falibilidad del oficio que cada día desempeñamos, pero también con orgullo, ¿no? de saber y de ser conocedores de la importancia de lo que hacemos cada día. Por tanto, bienvenidas sean todas las conversaciones sobre periodismo en foros como este y en otros foros. El invitado de hoy es de lujo y es un placer presentaros a James Harding. James fue corresponsal en Washington del Financial Times, es uno de los periodistas británicos más influyentes e importantes y tras su carrera en el Financial Times en 2007 fue nombrado director de The Times, donde estuvo unos 5 años hasta 2012. Yo creo que ahí se enfrentó a 3 retos que seguro que podrá contarnos cosas. Uno es el reto de la rentabilidad. The Times en ese periodo dio el gran paso adelante de habilitar una plataforma de pago por contenidos digitales, el mal llamado muro de pago. En aquella época fue una apuesta muy controvertida, con una determinación del editor y propietario del periódico, Rupert Murdoch, muy llamativa. Y en una redacción sabemos que sin rentabilidad no hay libertad. Y creo que en ese sentido la experiencia seguro que fue muy interesante. Se enfrentó a otro gran reto de esta industria y de esta profesión, que es el reto de la credibilidad. Evidentemente van vinculados uno al otro, con el estallido del escándalo de las escuchas. Allá por 2011-2012 yo estaba recién llegado de corresponsal en Londres del diario ABC. Veo colegas aquí, veo a Ana, que estábamos allí alucinando, ¿no?, con el escándalo, que fue traumático para la prensa británica, para los profesionales de esas redacciones, sobre todo para las del grupo de News International, ¿no? El News of the World era el diario tabloide más vendido con diferencia en Estados Unidos, en Reino Unido, se cerró tras el escándalo, y sus diarios hermanos The Sun y en la prensa seria The Times, que dirigía James, y The Sunday Times, lo vivieron con mucha intensidad. Visitar el edificio de News International en aquella época, yo recuerdo, impresionaba muchísimo, ¿no? Decías, madre mía, por lo que tienen que estar pasando. Y hay un reto para los periodistas que han tenido el privilegio de dirigir grandes cabeceras como The Times, que es el reto del periodismo de cada día. Y ahí hay una anécdota, la cuenta Mikel Ayestarán, corresponsal en Oriente Medio de ABC y de Vocento, en su libro, que os recomiendo leer, de una típica escena cubriendo el conflicto sirio, en el que un grupo de periodistas van en un vehículo de prensa y en un momento no esperado, como ocurren estas cosas, estallan las bombas a su alrededor. Mikel no estaba en ese momento preparado para semejante escenario, y a su lado, uno de los colegas que iba con Mikel en una cobertura siria era Richard Beeston, responsable de internacional de The Times, que en ese momento, sin dudar un minuto, cogió su casco, cogió su chaleco, se lo dio a Mikel. Mikel miró un poco diciendo, este tío está loco. Era un veterano periodista con el culo pelado, con perdón, de cubrir conflictos, y le susurró al oído, no te preocupes, estoy enfermo de cáncer, lo único, no se lo digas a mi mujer. Y le entregó los bártulos que podían salvarle la vida, ¿no? Dick se murió hace unos años, pero era un reflejo de la entrega profesional y la factura humana, yo diría, de aquellos personajes de las redacciones que escriben el mejor periodismo de los grandes diarios como The Times, ¿no? Y seguro que fue un privilegio dirigirlo. James después pasó a dirigir quizás la institución informativa más impresionante e intimidante, yo creo que del mundo, que es la BBC. Lo explicaban bien en el vídeo los colegas. Tuvo que ser un salto para haber sido un empleado de Rupert Murdoch, que tiene en la BBC una de sus bestias pardas. It must have been fun. Y pasó a otro nivel de exposición pública, política permanente, que seguro que fue un reto, y sobre todo, lo explicaban en el vídeo, a una institución periodística informativa que ha acuñado, digamos, mecanismos de trabajo, mecanismos burocráticos, mecanismos institucionales para cada día, cada minuto, velar por la independencia, ¿no? Con unos niveles de exigencia en este sentido muy llamativos. Para aquellos que os interesa la televisión, es muy interesante hacer el ejercicio comparado de ver cómo son los órganos de gobierno de la BBC, cómo son elegidos los órganos de gobierno de la BBC, cómo es el talento social, cultural y político que integran en ese Consejo de Gobierno, a diferencia de otros países que no vamos a nombrar. Por tanto, seguro que esa experiencia, diferente a la de The Times, pero fue muy interesante seguro. Y yo espero que James nos cuente hoy un poco de su nueva aventura, que está a punto de arrancar con un proyecto periodístico nuevo, en una era, y termino aterrizando en el tema de hoy, yo diría que fascinante, llena de oportunidades, en la que la industria creo que ha recuperado, lo sentimos los que estábamos aquí con Marty Baron hace un año, el optimismo y el orgullo. Creo que ya es constatable que frente a una cierta ortodoxia digital a la que nos llevó esa fascinación / dependencia por plataformas de distribución como Google y como Facebook, creo que ha habido una serie de factores correctivos que nos han llevado a abrazar, muy guiados por el ejemplo de gente como Marty Baron, de diarios como el New York Times, como el Financial Times, como otras publicaciones digitales nuevas más pequeñas que han abrazado otra lógica y que nos muestran que una heterodoxia periodística es posible. Y yo creo que ese es el momento de la industria, los que tenemos el privilegio de trabajar en ella, creo que es en el que estamos. Creo que hay que reconstruir una narrativa, hay que reconstruir muchas cosas, hay que redefinir a quién nos dirigimos cada día, para qué hacemos eso tan importante que hacemos cada día. Y es un momento fascinante para que emprendedores de todo tipo, también dentro del periodismo, nos ayuden a redescubrirlo y aporten a esta nueva corriente, yo diría, llena de dificultades, qué duda cabe. Esto es un negocio muy complicado, al menos los que lo hacemos con la obligación de ser rentables cada día, lleno de fallos y falible, como digo siempre, pero creo que es un momento muy interesante. Así que en esta nueva conversación sobre periodismo vamos a escuchar ahora a James Haddon. It's a real pleasure to have you here. You're very welcome. Your predecessors set a very high standard, but we're sure your former activities and your future activities in journalism will help us connect with the bigger global conversation around journalism, which is a passion we all share, and that's what this forum is about. So we're really happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. That was an incredibly generous and kind and fascinating introduction. And I think it was the first time that I've ever had an introduction where I thought halfway through, as you told the story about Richard Beeston, I'm going to burst into tears. I'm actually going to go on stage, and I'm already crying at a speech that I'm not giving but that you're introducing. So thank you, Dean Cara, thank you very much. Thank you, Director, thank you to the University of Navarra. For all of those in Pamplona, hi. We're all going to be working for you one day, so remember us. We're fans of yours. And to the Rafael del Pino Foundation, thank you so much for hosting me and all of us tonight. I once came out of a speech. It was a British politician's speech, and we got together with the main journalists, the leader writers of the Times, and we were having an argument about what the speech was about. What was it really about? And one of the leader writers said to me he thought it was about an hour. And I know that sometimes when you look back at a speech, you say, what was it about? You say it was about an hour. I'm going to try and speak for about 40 minutes, and then I hope that we will be able to have really as open a conversation as possible. I love the theme and the spirit of this endeavor by the University of Navarra, the idea that we should be open and discussing the future of journalism, the future of media, and the future of the society we live in. So with that, I'm going to start the speech. Like all good journalists, I started with a question and then changed it. So I tweaked, I hope if you don't mind, from a title that was the future of freedom of expression, or freedom of expression in the internet age, to something more cryptic, The Valley and the Hill, Technology, Democracy, and the Future of Free Expression. In 1984, a good place, I hope you'll agree, to start a discussion on the future of freedom of expression, Apple Computer ran an ad on Super Bowl Sunday. Years later, as many of you who know it will attest, people still talk about it. But in case you haven't seen it, let's start just by taking a look at it. I hope Jose can run it.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Our purification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984
the personal computer promised freedom. Not just liberation from the computer systems of IBM, but untold possibilities of personal expression. Tonight, I'd like to talk about what that freedom looks like now. Because it's obvious that the freedom of expression we've got isn't exactly what was advertised. We have, if you like, human zombies who've been unleashed from the mainframe, but now lashed to their mobile phones. And the internet age is proving to be like other revolutions, morally messy. Like no other revolution, it has empowered the individual. It's hastened the exchange of ideas. It's accelerated our capacity to fix problems and improve lives. But very much contrary to expectations, it has not just redistributed power, it has concentrated it in very few hands. And increasingly, it appears that we have been emancipated from industrial drudgery only to find ourselves in a digital dystopia. Truth, mental health, neighborliness, democracy, all struggling to cope with the challenges posed by what's happening on the small screen. The question before us is, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make the internet work for society? And the truth is we're struggling to answer that question. And what's more worrying still is that's the easy question. This question has two parts. The first part is making the digital media work for us. The harder part, the second part, is going to be making artificial intelligence work for us. But let's be clear, the issues we are facing now are just the dress rehearsal for the arguments to come. When and whether to regulate, what behavior to encourage, which incentives and which prohibitions to put in place. This evening, I'd like to talk about what should happen in the relationship between technology and government, between Silicon Valley and Capitol Hill, between the valley and the hill. I'd like to talk about the metrics that we should begin to ask of those valley companies. I'd like to talk about the kinds of regulation that politicians in London and Madrid, Washington and Brussels should consider, and the interventions, the creation of new kinds of public space in the internet age. We should set out, I think, in a spirit of radical optimism. And I feel that way particularly keenly at a place such as this, on an evening such as this. It is an exceptional honor to be a guest of the University of Navarra, which has had such a long and meaningful commitment to journalism and the modern communications industry, a place that I have to say I'm rather intimidated by, has quite such an illustrious roll call of journalists to its name. I believe that this is the most exciting time to be a journalist since the advent of television. that the internet enables us to gather information, to tell stories in ways that were far beyond our imagination just a generation ago. I also think it's an important time, a consequential one for journalists and for journalism. We need to speak truth to power, particularly when power is proving that it likes to talk back, or perhaps I should say tweet back. When politicians and demagogues are looking to marginalize journalism, when authoritarians are deciding what their citizens should know, when the noise of the digital age is muffling the news, this is a time for journalism. More than ever, we need journalism that speaks for the people and takes a stand to the powerful. For all the eyes that now exist in the digital devices we use today, it's a time when, strangely, so much is going unseen. We all look, once again, to reporters. And I look at a school like the University of Navarra, with its students here in Madrid and you in Pamplona. And I believe this is exactly the kind of place with both the energy and the expertise that has the ability, and I should say the responsibility, to shape the modern media and the society we're going to live in. Personally, I find myself in an exciting spot too. Until last month, which I note ended yesterday, until last month, I was running BBC News, which across the UK and around the world, in radio, in television and online, in English and in nearly 40 other languages, employs just over 8,000 people. Today it's just me. I'm launching a new kind of information and ideas business, but in case anyone is expecting a big reveal, or worse still, a pitch, I'm not going to be talking about my startup tonight. I'm not ready to do that. As you may have realized, today marks the very beginning of my very first month working on it, so I hope you'll give me a little time, and I hope that the students in Pamplona will have me back one day when I'm up and running to talk about it. Instead, I want to talk about the news and the digital world that we're all facing, the future of freedom of expression in the internet age. I once asked Richard Gingras, many of you may know him, he runs news at Google. I asked Richard, what did he think was the future of news? He paused, thought deeply, and said, more news. And indeed, the future of free expression is more free expression. The unstoppable fact of my working life has just been that there's more and more and more stuff. When I started at the FT, I guess we produced a couple of hundred stories a day. By the time I got to the Times, daily papers, along with their 24-hour, 7-day-a-week websites, were producing about 400 pieces a day. I arrived at the BBC to discover that we produced 4 seconds of news for every second of the day. And it turns out we were only barely competing. Look at the volume that we're competing with now. The numbers I'm going to quote now are a little out of date, but they give you a sense of what's happening in our times. Every minute on Facebook, there are 510,000 comments posted, 293,000 statuses updated, and 136,000 photos uploaded. On Instagram, for example, there are 95 million photographs and videos shared every day. Before we go any further, I'd just like to say that the vast majority of this is for the good. Technology is a force for love. It's no accident that this is the greatest period in human history for love. It's easier to love who you want, to share photos and messages of people you love, to be comforted by others in grief or loss, to find the things you cherish, all thanks to these powers of technology. Technology is a force for joy. Life's funnier. We wouldn't have had the mashups of Donald Trump lip reading. You wouldn't have had some crazy lady in a car park wearing a Chewbacca mask laughing hilariously. You wouldn't have had a little boy sitting in a car telling a monkey on the roof where he thought the monkey on the roof should go. You wouldn't have had the wonderful moment at lunchtime one day on the BBC News, a sage, no doubt wise pundit, talking about the future of the Korean peninsula, only to be interrupted by his kids and then his wife, trying to salvage a live moment of television. And all his professionalism brought us to this day no greater wisdom about the Korean peninsula, but we laughed. Until the internet, we didn't know that cats could skateboard, and now we know that they're unfeasibly good at it. Technology is a force for justice. The exchange of information, the empowerment of the individual and of the individual author is tackling injustice more than any one newsroom ever did. Think of Black Lives Matter. Think of Me Too. Think of I Paid a Bribe. How easy might it have been to dismiss, underestimate, or entirely ignore the abuse of power had it not been for the power of free expression in the internet age. And technology is undoubtedly a force for progress. Tom Friedman, the New York Times columnist, I think brilliantly charts the achievements of this age of accelerations. We have witnessed in these last 50 years the most successful period in the history of our species. Life expectancy up, literacy up, infant and maternal mortality down, death in conflict hugely down. And indeed, it is worth putting things in some historical context. If you listen to the Yale historian, Tim Snyder, he makes the point that innovations in the media have always been accompanied by great ruptures in society, often very bloody ones. We think of the newspaper as a genteel, even pacifying form of media, but the advent of the printing press was followed by 150 years of religious war in Europe. Likewise, we think of the radio as a soothing presence, but it was the medium of fascism and communism, the medium that Hitler and Stalin used to impose control and murder millions. By contrast, the internet's disruptions have been sweeping, but so far not bloody. But as we know, the internet age is wreaking its own kind of havoc. I'm just going to have a go, if I may, at listing the charges that are now leveled at the giants of Silicon Valley. Facilitation of hate speech and terrorism, enabling child pornography and paedophile rings, screen addiction, anxiety, inadequacy, online bullying, and chronic mental health problems, shielding criminality and corruption by defending encryption, and yet all the while plundering privacy by gathering personal data, fostering division through filter bubbles, stoking communalism, fueling polarization, destroying jobs ranging from drivers to reporters to the many millions more to come, draining confidence that democracy can operate in the digital age, increasing political manipulation through psycho-profiling of users, hollowing out political debate by diminishing it to tweets and GIFs, damaging public discourse, avoiding billions in tax, thereby not helping to pay for the huge public policy problems they're creating, and concentrating fortunes in the hands of the few, while depriving jobs for many and investing in the artificial intelligence and robots that may eventually run all of our lives. I didn't have time this evening for the long list, I just went for the short one. And for some years now, I've been fascinated by the large and growing gap between the valley and the hill, between technology companies and the state. But I think when you consider that list, and when you listen to what's happening in our public spaces and in the corridors of political power, it seems to me that this is now changing. The techlash has begun. Politicians who until recently have feted the tech giants have started to turn. The media is, to a greater or lesser extent, on the warpath. Even the most senior people at companies like Facebook, Salesforce, Uber, and Alphabet, they'll tell you that a wave of regulation is coming. And my friend Benji Vaughan, who's the founder in London of a community platform service called Disciple Media, he says 2018 is a year when things change. He thinks 2018 will be the year of peak platform. Consumer concern, disruptive competitors, and political activism will all begin to pile on the pressure. So I'd like to consider how best to reset the relationship between digital media and society on just one of those fronts, as it concerns free speech. I'd like to point out that in the list that I gave, I didn't include fake news. I don't think that serious people should spend too much time worrying about fake news. And I certainly don't think we should spend too much time using the term. Fake news has a very specific meaning to my mind. It means publishing deliberately false stories in order to get eyeballs, either for financial gain or for political gain. So the classic, to my mind, is Pope endorses Donald Trump. It's the archetype. It's wrong, but it gets a huge amount of traffic. And I think that fake news, by that definition, is similar to spam. Spam in the early days of email. It's a wrinkle. It's a problem, but it is a fixable one. There are much more serious dangers, I believe, that lurk in the news itself. Junk news. News that's hurried, thin, deliberately shrill, lazily misleading. Or repetitive news. The swathes of coverage given to the same people, same stories, at the expense of the stories that go untold, the issues that go unreported, the ideas that go unexplored. Or just simply too much news, the simple volume of stuff that's coming at us every minute of the day. The result is that often the news industry, for all its effort and yes, truly excellent work, often it can't see the wood for the trees. And at the heart of the problem is that newsrooms themselves are samey. The people are similar. The business models are similar, if not the same. The service to customers is similar. Newsrooms still mostly operate like a concert, with someone playing to people sitting in an audience. But the internet means that news must much more resemble a music festival, where the performers and the people together make it. In short, we're going to need to open up. And just be clear, I'm well aware that we as journalists and journalistic institutions, we sometimes just get it wrong, right? We make mistakes. And it's also the case that we're often not told the whole truth. I remember many years ago walking through the newsroom of the Times and hearing our religion correspondent. She was a formidable figure and one who was getting extremely angry. And I remember hearing her on the phone saying, "But you told me you were going to Jerusalem." No, you told me you were going to Jerusalem, but you didn't go to Jerusalem. No, you didn't go to Jerusalem. You lied to me. And you're a bishop. So yes, one of the problems that we face is that people in all walks of life, including, as Ruth will tell you, occasionally a bishop, don't always tell you the truth. And then again, there's a different kind of problem, a different kind of problem in the news that we face. There's spin, or in its modern term, the great Kellyanne Conway's terminology, alternative facts. We see the problem, the distortion, the telling of true pieces of information that, cleverly assembled, disguise the full story, disguise the real story. And of course, there are examples of bias, covering what's happened, informed by a point of view, rather than the other way around. But I just want to make sure that we don't miss a story that is creeping up on us, an element of what's happening in the news, that to my mind is possibly more important and more worrying and more pervasive than all of these things. Because I think that the rather self-indulgent debate about fake news is missing a much, much bigger problem. It's the rise and rise of propaganda, I was in Russia not long after the US presidential election, and I went to the Kremlin. I saw Dmitry Peskov, Vladimir Putin's press secretary. I asked him what he thought of what was happening in the world of the media, and he said very breezily, "The world is in an information war." And frankly, that seems to me to be a more accurate but also more alarming way of understanding the problem we've got. Authoritarian regimes are pouring billions into cable TV networks, news websites and papers, and of course their own digital platforms. If you look at last month's Freedom House numbers, they show how markedly democracy around the world is in retreat. And in large parts of the world, the problem of the information age is not too little state intervention, it's too much. There's in fact, I think, an oddly reinforcing dynamic at work. Authoritarian regimes are keeping technology and media companies on a tight leash. They're saying quite openly, we're doing this because we don't want the chaos. We don't want the information free-for-all of today's liberal democracies. Look at what's happening in the West. Meanwhile, those in the West are saying, we can't take on the tech companies. We can't interfere with the digital media space. They're appalled by the modern media totalitarianism that's on the rise in one-party states and the pseudo-democracies. Personally, I think we need to do more, much more, to stand up to the encroachment of a free, independent press by authoritarian regimes. In Myanmar, in Venezuela, in Russia and China, but also much closer to home, in Turkey, in Hungary. And I think it's the job of European journalists and governments, whether inside the European Union, outside it, or indeed leaving, it's the job of all of us to call out the erosion of a free press in countries that are members of the EU. Press freedom is one of the founding principles of the European Union. Its members should be fined or expelled if they do not uphold it. But what are we going to do about the problems that are more pervasive and, if you like, less clear-cut? What about the digital damage that is being done to faith in free speech in open societies? What should we do in our own democracies? The answer is that I don't know. I'm sorry to have come quite so far to tell you that I don't know the answer to this problem, but one of the things that strikes me about modern journalism is that we don't say often enough that we don't know. In fact, not knowing is the beginning of the great journalistic endeavor. And we live in this age where there's a tendency to overclaim. So I'd like to be honest and start by saying this is a really difficult problem, and I think it's going to need a lot of work. And I think that people, not just us journalists, but technologists, politicians, workers, parents, young people, we're all going to need to think these issues through together. Personally, my approach is to start thinking about it in three ways. The first is to rethink the incentives, the metrics for the big Silicon Valley companies. It's what I think of as step one. It's the softly, softly approach. We need to go to the tech companies and ask them to start measuring their outcomes. I've got to say I think it's in their interests to do this, because if they don't, heavier-handed regulation is coming their way. And frankly, if they don't, they're going to keep on being defined by others rather than themselves. Often the tech companies complain that their work, the digital contributions they're making to society, are not recognized in the GDP numbers. And they may well be right. But if we're going to change the behavior of some of the biggest companies in the world, the most constructive way of doing that is to reset their incentives. So what do I mean by that? What would public interest measurements for technology and digital media look like? I have in mind asking the tech companies to self-report at a far higher level of detail on the social impacts of their platforms and services, on cyberbullying, dissemination of hate speech, spread of violence, publication of sexual abuse, facilitation of corruption, data use for political campaigns, screen time by age, income, and geography. The platforms themselves should be collecting this information and making it public. As I see it, if we could do this, we could create a race for responsibility. It's easy to be cynical. It's easy and indeed fashionable to give the likes of Facebook a good kicking. And after all, the model for platforms like Facebook has been the optimization of engagement. What a brilliant phrase. The optimization of engagement, which to you and me means get everyone on Facebook and keep them there. But last month, Facebook signaled what could be a really profound change, a move to optimize meaningful engagement. Right? Now, of course, this could just be a piece of political positioning. But I wouldn't underestimate Mark Zuckerberg. And when you listen to what he has to say, what their ambitions are for 2018, they do look markedly different. If Facebook is going to do more than get politicians and publishers off their backs, but rather get up and over the big issues, if they are going to start fixing journalism, online safety, the privatization of data, and the manipulation of politics, if they really went to work on those issues, well then, meaningful engagement could prove to be very meaningful indeed. That said, that is the softly approach. There's a second approach, the one too that's coming. It's the one that we call regulation. And it's based on the assumption that better incentives will never be enough. The government will have to step in, either to break up the giants or to set the rules by which they operate. The politicians, from Berlin to Brussels, from London to Washington, are certainly limbering up to do both of those things. And we should be clear that it's risky. Regulators will often fix a problem of the past at the expense of the possibilities of the future, particularly when it comes to businesses they don't or can't, I say they don't, we don't or can't fully understand. And so as I see it in the technology sector, what we're beginning to see is a very fundamental change in the political environment. It looks to me very much like the financial services sector did 10, 20 years ago. Back then, if you remember, banks enjoyed a privileged position in politics. The vogue then was for quote-unquote light touch regulation. Financial services banks were such generators of wealth, no politician wanted to really stop them setting up, stop them growing, stop them delivering to their exchequers, delivering tax. And intervention was deemed, in the banks was deemed to be self-defeating. After all, globalization was unstoppable. Today, those same arguments, those arguments about the generation of wealth, the certain fatalism, the expectation that these organizations are too complex and too big to stop. These stories, these arguments, you hear too about tech. And so for the last decade, possibly two, few politicians have wanted to wrestle with the Silicon Valley giants. But look now, that's changing. Regulation is coming to protect private data in Germany. In the UK, the government is just beginning to think about how to make technology platforms as liable for what they publish as media companies. And after all, they're increasingly looking like they're one and the same. And of course, you're seeing similar moves as these big companies start behaving more and more like banks themselves. The financial regulators are looking at where financial service rules apply to tech. This debate about regulation is, to my mind, well overdue. For too long, we've laboured under some myths. One is that you can't regulate the internet because it's international, abundant, and fiendishly complex. Another is that politicians will be outfoxed by geeks. The technologists are just too smart for them. And a third is that the genie is out of the bottle, that Silicon Valley is too rich and too powerful to be tamed. This laissez-faire fatalism flies in the face of what we're seeing in China, Turkey, Russia. Let's not underestimate the power of the state. If it wants companies to behave in the public interest, it can. And indeed, it can go one further. It can create or help foster new kinds of public spaces on the internet. It can support its own interventions. And this is the third approach I'd like to just touch on. In 1922, the BBC was created in no small part because the British government feared the prospect of a technology as powerful as broadcasting being controlled by newspaper barons. With a motto that nation shall speak peace unto nation and a mission to inform, educate and entertain, the BBC has created the template for public service broadcasting. It has always aspired to quality, to give the best of everything to everyone. And unlike some of its cousins in Europe, its funding model has always been separate from the tax system, and its independence has been fiercely guarded. It serves the public, not the government. It answers to its audiences, not the politicians. And today, the UK is, in my view, extremely lucky to have a BBC that creates a public space in the digital world that is defined by those same public purposes: responsible journalism, distinctive entertainment, lifelong learning, and a shared experience of the great moments in national life. In my view, we are going to need more, not less, of this in the internet age. It's the next generation, if you like, of public service broadcasting. Let's call it public service networking. Places that are safe for children. Services that guarantee that our data is safe from political or commercial exploitation. Room to share ideas, learn new skills. Places that reinforce a sense of community. Town squares where the debate is civil, accurate, and I say again, independent. If the BBC had never been created, then today we would be standing here and discussing the invention of the BDC, the British Digital Corporation, to deliver to make public those ends by digital means. In the UK, my view is that more resources, therefore, not less, should be made available to the BBC to do just this. There was a time a few years ago when politicians suggested that the BBC had overreached online, up against Facebook, Google, Netflix, and Apple. To my mind, the risk is that public service providers like the BBC end up with an impoverished offering, not imperial ambition. And if people want public spaces that are safe, there are two ways that public service networking can happen. Either governments can introduce license fees or tech levies to fund free expression in the internet, or the giants themselves will set aside substantial funds to create such public spaces with clear social purposes and solid independence guarantees. These problems are not easy ones, as I said, and one of the things I've come to recognize about us as a group, we journalists, is that among our many foibles, among our many shortcomings, one of them is that we prefer stories that we understand but aren't important to ones that we don't understand but are. And I'd just like to point to a particular story, one that's unfolding right now, that seems to me to exemplify the complexity but also the urgency of the problem we've got. In 1984, in fact, not so many months after that Apple computer ad first aired, Pavel Durov was born in Leningrad. And today, Pavel Durov is at the center of an amazing story. A story that is, in many ways, indecipherable. It is, to my mind, a modern morality tale. One that, on the one hand, promises safe, free expression to the repressed in autocratic societies, and yet at the same time, a great weakening of democratic countries' ability to police criminals and sanction rogue states. As many of you will know, Mr. Durov created a Russian equivalent of Facebook, VKontakte, only to have it taken off his hands by, let's call them the friends of Mr. Putin. He moved to Dubai and he set up an encrypted messaging service called Telegram. Telegram, many of you will know, is now the communications medium of choice for tens of millions of Iranians who, without it, wouldn't feel safe speaking their minds. Now, Mr. Durov is planning an ICO, an initial coin offering. What he wants to do is see tech investors, as they surely are, race to sign up to buy his cryptocurrency. So what happens next? We're going to see an encrypted messaging service matched with an anonymous currency. In effect, a marketplace where kidnappers and drug dealers, rogue states and corrupt companies will be able to operate out of sight and beyond the reach of the law. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is that these are complicated problems, very complicated. But they also pose a profound challenge to those of us who are the champions of freedom of expression. If we're not careful, those of us who prize those liberties most keenly, those of us who believe in the freedom of expression, will find ourselves used as fig leaves for laissez-faire non-intervention, as these technology companies accrue wealth, power, and a slew of really big public policy problems to their names. We're going to need to find new ways to bridge the gaps between the valley and the hill, between technology and government. The happy news is that we are not powerless, and particularly you, journalists, are not powerless to fix this. In fact, I think that this is one of the essential purposes of journalism in the 21st century. If you go and see the film The Post, or you've seen Spotlight, or you remember watching All the President's Men, it's very easy to be nostalgic. It's very easy to think, oh, those were the days, not least smoking in the office. Those were the days. But go and watch those movies again, because those days are now. The powerful exist in many more guises than just government. The big five forces reshaping our times: technology, longevity, globalization, identity, and the environment. These big five forces require journalists to reveal what's being done to us, and quite often what's being done in our name. And today, you, the coming generation of writers and editors, radio reporters and filmmakers, data scientists and designers, the citizens born in the internet age, you have the means to organize for change. You have the networks to find out the truth. And you have the ability to do the journalism that informs a future that works for us. To coin a phrase, good night and good luck. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. It was really interesting. Tenemos tiempo, no mucho, pero vamos a aprovecharlo al máximo para el debate. Quienes quieran hacer preguntas, podéis pedir unas tarjetitas que os van circulando, y así es una manera de hacerme llegar un mayor volumen de preguntas y de plantear a James el mayor número de asuntos. Mientras vais animando esas tarjetas, el debate, podéis escribir las preguntas en el idioma que queráis. Luego el debate lo moderaré en inglés para hacerlo un poco más ágil. James, while they bring those questions for you, a quick crossfire here. Questions from the Valley. Facebook withdrawing from the news, reducing the weight of news after the latest tweak in their algorithm. Withdrawing, some would say, from what it means to be a responsible publisher Is that good news or bad news for journalism?
Well, so look, so the answer is we don't know yet, right, because it's just happened. We're talking about a very marginal change at this stage, 5% to 4% of the overall feed on Facebook.
So Mark says.
Yes, they say. I think the real question that I look at with Facebook is, are they basically trying to get the publishers to leave them alone, right? If that's the case, it's just not going to work, right? Because the truth is, there's just too much news. I mean, look at that list of things. And it's also just not right. The job of journalism is to hold those powerful agencies, including companies like Facebook, to account. So we're never going to be in a stage where they're going to get the publishers off their back. I think the question that we've got to find out is, have they enabled people to find more quality news, and if you like, reduced some of the noise, or have they not thought it through properly and damaged plurality, the range of voices, and if so, that's a real problem. And the thing that's frustrating at the moment is that what they really should do is just be much more open about how they're doing it. Because once you know, it's like doing your homework. When you see how people have done it, show us your workings, we'll understand better exactly what they've done.
Questions from the Hill now.
Okay.
If a wave of regulation is coming, so says the person you quoted, Donald Trump president, good news for journalism or bad news for journalism?
Oh, my goodness me. Good news for subscriptions. Yeah. It's been a very good news for subscriptions. I'll tell you what, but let's do, because I can't believe how generous it is of you to spare your time. I'm going to ask a quick question. Who here thinks that those big technology companies should be broken up? How many people think that we should actually break up the big technology companies? You ask in Spanish too.
¿Quiénes creéis que esa regulación de las grandes compañías tecnológicas debe pasar por fragmentarlas y reducir su tamaño? ¿Quiénes sí creen que debieran ser fragmentadas?
Okay, so maybe, let's see, not very many.
Shy.
Right? Because I asked this question last week. I was in Davos last week. I asked the same question. 2/3 of the room. And a year ago, certainly 2 years ago, nobody. So the question is, I think, are companies like Facebook going to fix their problems? So I'm doing another thing that journalists do, is ask questions, not answer them. So I think that, as I say, if you go into this in a spirit of radical optimism and a belief that things are really going to need to change, one of your optimistic conclusions about the populism that we see in politics and the passion that we see in politics is that a new generation of people are getting energized. And I think that in 20 years' time, we're going to look at the quality of our political leadership, and they are going to have been forged in the political arguments of these times. And the same is true for journalism. There is an absolute passion for journalism, for telling the stories that are untold in our societies, and telling the stories that are being mistold in places around the world. So actually, in terms of the group of people that we will call our fellow colleagues, and as I say, probably our bosses, they are, I think it's very energizing and very, very positive.
Brexit, good or bad for a journalist or journalist? And a question from the audience, how would you qualify the BBC's coverage of Brexit? How challenging was it? Were there any mistakes made?
So I think it's, so one of the things...
You can't say, I don't know to this, to this question.
Yeah. How long have you got, poor people? Yeah, this is suddenly becomes group therapy. So yes, of course there are mistakes made, right? The big difference on a journalistic organisation that is owned by the public and serves the public is not whether you make mistakes, it's how you answer them. So we tried, in the course of the referendum, to be really organised about hearing from different groups. So we put in place a series of different audience councils. So we were listening all the time. So through the course, if you make a factual mistake, actually it's quite easy, right? Because someone calls up and says you're wrong, and you are wrong, right? If you make a mistake of emphasis, if you make a mistake of balance, if you make a mistake of omission, simply not reporting something, that's much harder. And so one of the things that we've tried to do at the BBC is create a mechanism whereby we could listen to our audiences. And this has really changed my view of journalism. Because on the one hand, you've got the problem of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, where you're just overwhelmed by information coming at you. On the other, you do want to get organized about listening. If you can be organized about listening, you can provide a quality of journalism that's different. So Brexit is unbelievably challenging. As you know, referendums are very complicated. The polarization is passionate and in my experience can be very aggressive to politicians, but also to those people who report on politics. And in the social media age, that's been a very upsetting and very tough part of journalism. I have to say, I also think it's been one of the things that has reminded people of the value of independent professional journalists whose job it is to go out and report the news.
Since many in the audience asked about referendums, but our own referendum, which we had not so long ago, and there has been this debate, what the role of the media should be, how to deal and cope with polarization. How would you describe the echoes or coverage from the Spanish referendum in the British press? I'm not sure to what extent you followed it, but there's always a perceived scene of mischaracterization from those living the referendum and the coverage of the British press, which we tend to love, and it's a sport we love to talk about and discuss, and other Anglo-Saxon newspapers.
Exactly. To love and sometimes not to love, and either way to do it with feeling.
How was it portrayed there?
So I think that obviously there was, and I was very aware because people on both sides of the argument were directly in contact with me in our newsrooms. I was very aware of the very particular problem in covering what happened and is happening, but what happened in Catalonia and Spain in the end of last year. Obviously the problem was that we were covering an event in the wake of a formal independence referendum in the UK, you covered it, with so many of the similar tone and so much of the feel that was similar, and yet, of course, the language was fundamentally different. We had a formal referendum agreed by Edinburgh, the governments of Edinburgh and London, and obviously what happened in Catalonia was not. It was an organised expression of an opinion around independence, but it was not. But it did not have that the same, to use a clunky expression, the same buy-in of the apparatus of government and the constitution. And what you're facing there, which is really, challenging journalistically, particularly in television, less so in radio, is that you've got a debate between images and ideas. So you have very powerful images, right, of a group of people whose passion and numbers light up the television screen, and you've got a very powerful argument too of principle, right, but without the force of those images. And so we were really keenly aware of it. I'm sorry to go on about it quite so long, but one of the things that you're trying to do if you're thinking through the role of an independent and impartial broadcaster is how you actually balance those things. And, I made this point a few times, maybe a little too heavily, about independence. Once you've got that independence, the only way that it's rewarded is people seeing you conscientiously working hard at delivering on that impartiality. And if you followed the stories of the BBC, we've been heavily criticised about the Scottish referendum, the EU referendum, politics, Of course we will, because we are seeking to cover politics in a very polarized time. But what I hope the answer demonstrates is that we're really thinking about the detail of how our journalism impacts on or reaches audiences.
Voy a plantear dos preguntas cortas más. Nos hemos pasado ya 5 minutos. Si los organizadores no hay más, si hay más tarjetas.
Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and do short answers. This has never happened before, so let's give it a whirl. Yeah.
Okay, a hypothetical and a personal question. Hypothetical question. If you were a British journalist / publisher in Brexit Britain, would you see more value in a neutral type of media, cold, detached, for the mind, or would you find more fun / value in a more partisan, emotional, to the heart type of media? Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically, this is easy. So it's definitely much more fun telling people what you think. There is a much greater public service and value in providing people with information and leaving them to make up their own minds. The answers are in the numbers. So the BBC audience numbers and trust numbers are many times greater than any of the other news providers.
Is there a way back from Brexit? A couple of questions in the audience said, okay. Is it true that we hear that there might be a reverse engine?
So I think the most likely, so I think what we learned at the end of last year, in December of last year, is that Theresa May wants to deliver Brexit, that she'll deliver it on terms that work better for those who want to remain, a closer alignment with Europe, and that the people who are desperate to leave will accept those terms as long as the flag comes down. Is there a way back? There are potentially 3, not as likely as leaving. The 3 ways back are essentially a political revolt in Parliament. That is very difficult to see because it's hard to deliver, but that's route 1 this autumn. The second route is a call for a referendum on the nature of the deal, and there's some evidence, but not reliable evidence, that there's growing public opinion in favour of that. And the third is that the changing nature of the European Union, that if you like Macron and Merkel's European Union, means that there are, if you like, different entry levels, and once the UK leaves, it says, actually, we'd like to come back on the terms that you've agreed acceptable to other member states. And so I think those are the 3 routes.
There's several fascinating questions. I think we're going to end up with a question from the students from Universidad de Navarra, who ask very smartly, of course. You were the youngest editor at the age of 38 years old. Fue director de The Times con solo 38 años, el director más joven del periódico. Give them an advice. How hopeful, where should they place their bets in terms of training, skills? That's what they're asking from you. And we'll leave it with that.
Okay, all right. So I think that there is something fundamental that puts the next generation of journalists genuinely at an advantage. 38, when I was appointed editor of the Times, sounded young. Today it sounds old. And the reason is that the skills in storytelling and the appreciation of how you share information has changed so fundamentally. And if you look at the generation of people who took over television and transformed television, they grew up with it. So the first television broadcasts of the BBC, as you may know, had a man in a dinner jacket reading the radio bulletins and filmed for television. And the thing that terrifies me is that, you know, we're the same. We think that we can ship TV and newspaper journalism online. The students who've grown up with it and are working today are going to transform it. And part of the excitement that I've got about the changes are that we are going to work networks in terms of the way we gather information in a way that we never have before.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Gracias a todos por venir y que siga la conversación.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.